So Guillaume Lecointre, he is a professor at the National History Museum of Paris. He's a scientific advisor of the president of the museum. He's a zoologist, working mainly in theoretical systematics and evolution. He's a specialist in the phylogeny of teleostean fishes and Antarctic biodiversity. In 2020, he has published 135 papers and 23 books, including books about evolutionary didactics and the dissemination of Darwinian thought. He has twice was awarded by the Société Zoologique de France. He has the National Award for the Comité Laïcité République and the award from the Rationalistes Union, and he's member too of the Order National Order of the Légion d'honneur. Professor Lecointre is participating as an foreign researcher of the Project Anid-Covid 0025, who is a part of the activities that we are beginning now this year with this conference. So please, Guillaume, the auditory is all for you. We are excited to listen for your conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm forced to speak in English. I can't speak Spanish, and I wouldn't give my talk in French, so I'm staying in English for this. Yes, disseminating evolutionary theory has some difficulty. You already know, all of you maybe already know. I will give you some path, some food for thought about improving our dissemination of evolutionary theory at school, at any level of schools. Evolution is a word that was given at the early 18th century to what we call today embryonic development, and the term was used as a metaphor for the development of life through history of life, used like this by Spencer. Darwin doesn't use the term evolution in the first edition of his master book, The Origin of Species. He uses this word only after the 5th or the 6th edition of the book. Evolution for our public can be thought as a story, just a story to tell, the history of life, and it is at best represented by an iconic tree of life. It's based on a tree of life. For our publics, evolution is often understood as a progress, something, a change that is leading to a progress of life, but also a progress of humans, a kind of hierarchical development of life and human diversity. Evolution is also used as a theory, scientific theory used by paleontology, biology, and anthropology at the least. Evolution is also thought as a process of change of living things through time. And for scientists, most of the time, for scientists, evolution is mainly these two items: the process of change by which living things evolves through time, and a theory used by different sciences, a theoretical background. So these two definitions are more or less those of scientists. The others are cultural items that our public have in mind. Evolution seems to be counterintuitive. As you know, cats make baby cats. I don't see anything evolving during my life. Because you know why? Because small organisms do evolve fast enough to be detected as evolving organisms, but you need specific tools to observe this evolution. Big organisms needs time to manifest a change at the level of their populations. So we can see with our own eyes, we can see evolution of big organisms. Public would be convinced about evolution if it would be possible to see a cow, population of cow becoming something else, you know, but it's not the case. So it's not under our sense. We live with this impression that nature is perfect. Nature is perfect means that everything seems designed in a way that it works. And living things look like design. We have this impression that your fingers or your arms is well suited to be used as an arm or as a finger. And there is also another cultural item in our public's minds, most of the public, is that humans are not animals. You are, and unfortunately for the common, you are either a human or an animal. You cannot be both, you know. So it's a cultural heritage of monotheisms. So we have to deal with this heritage when we teach evolution. And teaching evolution is going against each of these four items. Unfortunately for those receiving the course of science, but if we teach seriously science, we are forced to challenge these four items. So teaching evolution is anticipated by adults as a difficult task. And as a result, school children in France, at least in France, school children don't hear about evolution before the age of 10 or 11 years old. And I will say that it's a problem of adults. It's not the problem of school children. If we are ambitious in terms of pedagogy, we should be able to teach evolution as early as possible during the curricula of school children. Maybe starting around 7 or 8 years old, we should be able to start to give the very first steps to think evolution when we learn biology. And why as early as possible? Because we start with classifying categories to the kids while they don't hear about evolution at the first step. So you can guess that those categories will be taken by the kids as if they were in nature and not created by humans. And if there is no evolution to explain that change is normal, stability is rare, kids think the other way, that stability is the rule and change is exceptional or maybe non-existent. So this relation between the categories, we need to speak about nature, and evolution is antagonic. And if we don't teach evolution right from the beginning, the categorization of life will be crystallized in the real world, in kids' mind, I mean. So there is a relationship between classification and evolution to deal with. Classification is a matter of systematics. It manages consistency between objects, concepts, and names. I'm constructing concepts in my mind, sets in my mind, so that if I put a word on it, I am able to use words with a general, with some degree of a concept, to be able to speak about things with a certain degree of generality. And those concepts and those words we need them to be anchored in the real world by type specimens in natural history collections. if you don't have a reference specimen in a natural history collections, the concept will be disconnected from nature, from the real world, because living things are changing. So for the stability of your concept, you need a reference. Also for the name, you need a reference in our collection. Otherwise, if you go back to nature to pick up a new specimen, as the one that were picked up 2 centuries ago, I will say that the population has already changed, if not disappeared completely. So you need to anchor our natural history vocabulary, we need specimen collections. So this relationship between concepts, names, and objects is a matter of systematics. We never teach systematics, we never teach evolution at the same time as we teach change. I mean, when we teach classification, we don't speak about change. And when we speak about change, we don't speak about classification. So the relationship between change and classification is not really well understood by the kids, but not well set by the teacher. You know, if you look at the real world, the biological real world, things are always changing. Even a single organisms like here, you know, between this stage on the left and this stage on the right, this individual has replaced completely all its matter. So there is a permanent change, and how your language can deal with that change. If we are in science, we create concepts and words as close as possible to real matter changing. So you can do it until the end. I mean, it has to stop somewhere, because if you give a new name to a thing, starting from the point that something has changed in this thing, there is a permanent change. So you will be obliged to change your words permanently. So you wouldn't be able to speak anymore. So you have to negotiate between change and stability. The way Western countries have negotiated this relationship between names and change, for an individual like this, for instance, is giving the same name to this individual from the date of its birth to the date of its death. And this individual will have the same name all along the process of change. So we decided to hide the change by using the same words to designate this individual. So our language hides change for this individual. But you know, from this stage to this stage, this person has changed all his atoms. So it's not the same thing in terms in a scientific speaking. It is not the same entity. And don't tell me about memory. You will have the impression that each individual has something not changing because it has its own memory. You know that memory can be misleading, and memory is changing also. It's an emerging property from matter, so it changes also. So everything changes. So if you want the stability of a word, you have to negotiate with change. You have to put some part of change hidden by the stability of your words. It's the same for species, actually. So in natural history and biology today has inherited from a double philosophical background, the background of Platonician idealism and the background of nominalism. For Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist of the 18th century, you know, species were real and they were created by God, because science was made at this time. Science was made under the leadership of theology. So there is no change, it's fixism, and the categories are real. Linnaeus see here at the middle of this picture, Linnaeus sees only one thing. He sees the ladybug, and variability at the surface of each of those ladybugs is neglected, is considered as negligible. So variability is neglected. The most important thing is the idea that transcends each individual. Each individual is linked to the idea, transcending idea by an essence. And this is why there is a strong relationship between idealism and essentialism. You don't do any evolution in that way of thinking. It's fixist way of thinking nature. 1 century after Linnaeus, for Darwin in 1859, it was the reverse way of thinking. There is no idea. There in the real world, there are only individuals, and Darwin sees here not one thing. He sees 24 things. There is no essence. Variation is real, and categories are conventional. Categories are real for Linnaeus. Categories are conventional for Darwin, and we have inherited from these two way of thinking. And biology, it took 1 century for biology to go from Linnaeus to Darwin's way of thinking. All the 20th century, the debates about species, there were 1 century of debates about species between who were both in these two contradictory heritages. Oops, sorry. Too bad, we never learn classification at the same time of evolution. So this double heritage is not managed in school children's minds. So what about evolution and its challenges? Several investigations have shown that most of the, at least in France, when you speak about evolution to the French people, they think about Lamarckian transformation, not about Darwinian evolution. In 1809, Lamarck published the first scientific theory about change of life. And to make it short, variation for Lamarck, variation appeared to the benefit of that gained the new character, the new change. It was considered as the result of efforts that the organisms made to survive, that the variation occurred. Variation occurred under the instruction of the environment. And so what happens, all the transformation that happens at the level of individuals also happened at the level of the population. So there is just the same phenomenon. So detection of transformation at the level of individuals is the same thing as detecting transformation at the level of the population. It's the difference between Lamarck and Darwin is not about inheritance. You know, Darwin at his time admitted inheritance of characters gained during life, as well as Lamarck did. So it is not that point that makes the difference between the two theories. What makes the difference is that for Darwin, change appears by chance across a subset of individuals. And it's not by making efforts that individuals gained a change. It's just through at random. And there is no link between the occurrence of change, of variation, if you prefer. There is no link between the occurrence of variation and the needs of the organisms. So variations that are that harm the individual can occur, and they won't survive. Those individuals won't survive. So what you detect as change at the level of individual is disconnected from the change you are detecting at the level of population. It is a big difference with Lamarck. So there is a process of death. Only those individuals that randomly acquired beneficial changes will be able to reproduce in a given environment, and the environment acts as a filter. In Lamarck's theory, environment acts as an instructor, but in Darwin's theory, environment acts as a filter. So the population is filtered, and at the end you have for a given feature, a single variant of a given feature will stabilize within the population, will be stabilized. Other variants will arrive at the future, obviously, because matter is always changing by definition. But natural selection is right from the beginning a stabilizing on the short term is a stabilizing factor. So for the French public, when you speak about evolution, to most of people, they think a Lamarckian process. They put Darwin on the thing, but the thing is the Lamarckian process. I'm convinced that the Darwinian process of evolution could be taught at school as early as possible if we select the good facts to focus on. And this table was published by my colleague Patrick Thor, and it organizes Darwin's observation in his book. And you know, you don't need DNA, you don't need genomes and genetic mutations to teach evolution. You teach a principle. So the principle is starting from facts and inference and deductions. The first fact is variation. Is not so difficult to show to the kids that a population of organisms that reproduce among them do vary. There is variation, natural variation or domestic variation. Fact number two, people are able to use this variation to select plants to be eaten by us or animals to be eaten by us too. So there is a possibility for humans to use this variation to change the morphology of a plant or an animal, just make the difference between the wolf and dogs. You have nice examples of dogs. We don't eat dogs, obviously, but it can be shown that animals can be domesticated and changed through domestication. So there is a property of those animals or plants to be selected. So we call that selectionability. There is an ability of species to vary, so we call that variability. It's natural capacity to vary. Selectionability is natural capacity to be selected, which is important, because Darwin's question is, if you look at these two abilities, is there any factor in nature operating a selection? Because the species are have both capacity of variability and selectionability. Fact number three, organisms reproduce too much, if I can say. And it's always easy to show examples that organisms make many more babies than the environment can support. So there is a natural capacity of species to overcrowd the environment. When Darwin does his voyage across the world, he meets natural areas disconnected from any human action. For instance, the tropical rainforest in Brazil, and he finds natural equilibria of many species cohabitating the same place. Did he find a single species overcrowding the space? No, it was the contrary. Many species were cohabitating the same area. So there is an apparent opposition between these facts and the natural capacity of each species to overcrowd the place. So there should be a natural regulatory mechanism that makes cohabitating species with each other. And the deduction is that each species represents a limit to each neighboring species, or not only species, but also physical factors, chemical factors, physical factors, and so on. So this cohabitation and the physical factors do operate on species as a natural selector, if I can say, and the environment acts as a filter. Basic properties, to make it short, basic properties for drift and natural selection, this would not be taught for kids. I mean, this table is more useful as a path to direct different facts and deductions to organize at the classroom. But if you think it more widely, there are basic properties for entities to be submitted to drift and natural selection. First of all, variability. Second, this variability has to be transmitted. If there is variability without transmission to the next generation or transmission to any alter ego, there wouldn't be any evolution anymore. So the coupled variability and transmission gives you drift, random drift. And if you had constraints, you have natural selection, because constraints is the filter I was speaking about. Constraints is the reason why all the individuals that were born wouldn't give offspring at the same rate. There will be a differential reproductive success across individuals. These principles today we know that those principles can be given to proteins, cells, languages, cultural items. We are under the regime of the extended evolutionary theories. To make it short, the module transmission has changed recently, the last 15 years. In the biology I was taught when I was a student, is that when you pass from generation 1 to generation 2, what will be transmitted from one generation to another was only DNA from sexual cells, general line of cells. So we transmitted only genomes, if I can say, and the genome had a program, and to develop the individual, you develop what we call a program. It is a pre-formationist way of thinking. Today, it's very different now. It's called extended evolutionary synthesis, because what is extended, we know now that we transmit to the next generation many more than just genes from the germ cells. We transmit genomes, obviously, but we also transmit cells. We transmit cytoplasm. We transmit, the individual transmits something to cell through a different kind of inheritance, for instance, epigenetics. We transmit from organism to organism, we transmit behaviors, we transmit technical abilities, and from the individual to environment, we also through the concept of niche constructions, we transmit environments to the next generation too. So there are different levels of transmission to the next generation. We don't not only transmit DNA, we transmit many more than DNA. So what is changing is the module of transmission is widening, is more open now than it was previously. Anyway, this is one of the main challenge to the evolutionary theory today. And what I wanted to tell you about evolution is also the difficulties we biologists, we had in the last century with the notion of species, because the notion of species inherited from both of those two philosophical heritages, the essentialist one and the nominalistic one. If you look at Linnean way of thinking, God was the causal entity. God created a regularity of species that did exist. For Linnean, remember, Linnean practices, Linnaeus practices a species realism. Species are real for Linnaeus. God created the regularity of species. The explanation of regularity of individuals and species, the causality is God. We still speak about Darwin today because he reverted this way of thinking. You know, Darwin speaks about preservation of variance, the preservation of variance in the course of the struggle of life. Natural selection as the factor of the origin of species. Natural selection explain the regularity of individuals. What is given for Darwin is not species. What is given for observation is individual. And the regularity of individuals has a cause in natural selection. Is natural selection is a filter, it will stabilize within the population a given variant. So this is a reason why in the subtitle of the origin of species, it doesn't speak about evolution, it doesn't speak about transformation, it doesn't speak about transmutation, it speaks about preservation. So natural selection on the short term is a stabilizing factor. This is very important to understand. This is the first thing we have to teach about evolution to the kids. The natural selection explains the origin of similarity. The question of Darwin is not why and how the species is changing. The question, because Darwin already knows that the components of the species is changing, because the first biological fact is variation. So the change is already there. The good question is, what is the origin of similarity? Because the population is so different. Organisms change so much. They vary so much among them. Only a small part of the population can reproduce themselves in the next generation. So what is the origin of similarity? And this similarity, I'm doing with that for the needs of my language. But species are not in nature. It's a linguistic necessity. So the origin of species is not in nature. The origin of species for Darwin is epistemological. It's not natural. Natural selection explains the regularity of individuals with which I'm doing species for the need of my language. But Ernst Mayr didn't follow this line. I admit with you that on the long term, if the environment changes, the filter will changes. So what is to be filtered will change also. So on the long term, natural selections also explain changes, but on the long term, on the short term, it explains stability. Ernst Mayr practiced what we call species realism as Linnaeus. The species were real for Ernst Mayr. You know why? Because Ernst Mayr, at the middle of the 20th century, had a synchronic way of thinking species. Species were defined as connected population, populations connected with each other genetically. So if you look at species here and now, you have the impression that species are real. And this is the impressions kids have. When they look at nature, they know that dogs do not make baby with cats. So species are real. If you don't teach evolution at the same time of classification, you don't have this diachronic way of thinking species as George Simpson had in the 20th century. Only the depth of time can give you the conventional status of species. In a given genealogical lineage, you have to decide where you start the previous name, species name, and where you start the new species name. So the convention, you are obliged to think about species in terms of convention of language through using the diachronicity, the depth of time, if you prefer. So because Mayr didn't give priority to the depth of time, he practiced a kind of a species realism. So natural selection was explaining the change of something that already existed, that was species. So the way I was taught evolution when I was a kid, when I was a student, was natural selection explains how species do change. And this is most of the journalists think. It is what most of the journalists think when they go to you and ask you to speak about evolution. They start with saying that natural selection explains how do species change. And I will say no, for Darwin, first of all, natural selection explains how species do not change, on how individuals at each generation are stabilized around a given mean phenotype, because there is this filter that is acting, and only on the second time, on the longer term, natural selection explains how this stability can change, actually. It has some consequences. The consequences is that because natural selection during the 20th century was thought as a changing factor, not as a stabilizing factor, natural selection never entered within bodies. So medical sciences never took natural selection as a stabilizing factor within the body. Today, is this accident, if I can say, is behind us now. Natural selection for the 21st century explains the regularity of individuals. And you do what you want with this regularity. Obviously, you can do species, but you can do other things. And this principle came back now to within the body. And many papers coming out using evolutionary principles to deal with cancerous tumor. Tumors are subject to the same rules of natural selection as any other living thing. Clinicians are now putting that knowledge to use. So now, finally, we accepted the ideas that natural selection could be one of the stabilizing factors, not the only one, but one of the stabilizing factor that could explain why we have a regular functioning of our body. This is the first pillar of the evolutionary theory, and the second pillar, descent with modification, also entered the body in the recent years, and you have now phylogenies that are published of cells of a developing organism. This paper came out 2 years ago about the phylogeny of single cell transcriptomes and you can see different tissues taking place, and you have you can have enough phylogenetic interpretation of this development. This is ontophylogenesis, actually. Same for the xenopus, same for the toad. So species are neither given nor they are nor real, they are linguistic conventions. And can you imagine that the status given to species had indirect consequences on medicine, which can be surprising, but epistemologically, it is what happened. So now, if we do classify, what is the purpose of classifications, and how to deal with this relationship with classification and evolution? I won't read this sentence, famous sentence written in the first edition of Darwin's book in 1859. But what this sentence says that if we have to classify the living things, there are many ways to classify the world. The best principle to follow to classify is to follow genealogy. All true classification is genealogical, says Darwin. The fact that organs are distributed, or features are distributed across species, reflect of a past genealogy, not a creation like Linnaeus was thinking at its time. So this principle was set as a research program, but Darwin wrote himself that he didn't have the method to reach this program. We do classify organisms on the basis of what they have. Yes, not what they do or not where they live. You know, if you ask two kids to classify spontaneously a small set of species, if you don't give any prescription, they will do everything. Some kids will classify the species on what they do in common. Others will classify species according to what they have. Others will classify according to where they live, or sometimes you have values. Those ones are ugly, those ones are beautiful, and so on. So you have to give an instruction somewhere. So the game at the classroom is to classify according to what they have, not what they do, because you will have many complications if you mix both. The fly is flying, obviously, has a name is given to this animal. The pigeon is flying, but they both fly. But when you look at what is the organ with which they fly, there are very different organs. So what they do not necessarily reflect what they have. And what we call a wing has nothing to do. It's a pitfall of our vocabulary. The fly has a wing that is structurally very different as a fly of the pigeon. So our modern classifications are based on what organisms have, because if we, like Darwin's program, if we want to classify on the basis of genealogy, the best way to grasp genealogy is to detect the sharings. The sharings are the best witnesses of what the ancestors are legated to their descent. So if you classify according to what they have, you have the best chances to have a classification reflecting genealogy. The purpose of classification is genealogical. Darwin didn't have any method to do that. The one that succeeded in creating the method to make a correspondence between categories and the phylogenetic relationships is Willy Hennig, in the middle of the 20th century, the German entomologist Willy Hennig. So if you create a phylogenetic tree and you put names on nodes of that tree, you have automatically a genealogical classification. And we will say today phylogenetic classification, because there is a difference of vocabulary between genealogy and phylogeny. I won't go into more details on that. So as Darwin did, theory of evolution in science expressed the programs, scientific program given to classification. The meaning of classification is produced by the theory of the corresponding scientific field or the corresponding scientific discipline. It is the theory of the discipline that gives the program of its classification, its classificatory program, actually, the intention of the classification. As I said, you can classify with so many intentions that you have to choose one. And it is a theory that gives the classificatory program. And the facts, the classification needs to be based on facts, based on observations. So the theory is needed to interpret facts, observations, and facts nurture classification. So classification results from facts and result from its own program. We decided to classify according to phylogenetic relationships and not about what they do in common, what they share. What they do in common, or where they live, or and so on. There are other. Classification is putting life in nested sets. We have to face another inherited mental feature present in our public's mind or kids' mind, is what we call the cut or the break of the separation. The cultural heritage from the monotheisms is a separation in terms of value between the humans and the animals. If you go to a classroom of 12 years old or 13 years old kids and you say, okay, humans are animals, half the classroom just refuse the sentence, because our heritage is this cut between humans and animals. The humans tend to over-define themselves against animals that stay undefined. If you're an inhuman, you're not an animal, and vice versa. This is a part of our heritage, cultural heritage. In science, it is the reverse. We don't practice cuts, or we don't practice separations. We practice sharings, nested sets. So using nested sets, you can be both a human and an animal in the same time. You are humans because you have the big toe that is going to the same direction that the other toes, okay, and you have a language, articulated language, and you still be an animal because you have collagen, for instance. So you can be both. You can have both and be both. There is another issue to deal with, which is scala naturae from Aristotle. In science today, we will avoid piling hierarchies. You will avoid to use the scala naturae that was in our scientific background, also inheritance from the past times. From the Middle Age, you have this scala naturae expressed here that goes to the paradise. You have stones, plants, animal, human. Above humans, you have angels, and above angels, you have the paradise. And from Charles Bonnet's scala naturae here in 1745, the humans is culminating above here, and above the humans, you have the angels. And it is a scale of value, actually, not a scale facts. Some people try to negotiate with this scala naturae, saying that we are the most, they take only one parameter, one feature, one capacity, and ordinate all the living thing according to a single capacity of a single organ. You can do it if you want, but it's not the way systematics works today. Today we practice nested hierarchies from the most general to the most particular. It's not a hierarchy of value, it's a hierarchy of the most general to the most particular. So one of the cognitive issues when you learn classification is to clearly separate the activity of separation with the activity of agglomeration, nested sets. To separate together and to assign are two different mental activities that need to be clearly defined. Otherwise, if you create concepts while you are using a separating process, when you separate a sample, you can have on the one side things that have a feature, and on the other side, the other things that do not have that feature. And if you do groups on that, you will do on the right negative groups like invertebrates, which is stupid actually. If you are in science, you have to explain things, and you have to circumscribe things in order to be able to explain it. And you don't circumscribe things with absence of properties. You only circumscribe things with presence of properties. So you don't say anything about a snail or about a worm when you say that it is an invertebrate. They do not have the vertebrae. The humans have the vertebrae. So it is an old world dating back from the times where the humans were at the center of the universe, but it's not the way we think about it now. So we have to be careful with using sets positively defined by shared properties. In science, evolution as a theory, so sets the purpose of classification. We go from evolution to classification. But in teaching, classification is given without evolution. So you need to start from classification and to go to evolution. Remember, in the 20th century, there was a battle between those that were practicing classification before evolution. It was the synthetic theory of evolution of Mayer and Simpson. Vertebrate classes were considered as existent things, and they were looking at affinities, phylogenetic affinities between pre-existing classes of organisms. Doing that, they gave ancestor to descendant relationship to classes, which is stupid actually, because classes, we do classes. It is the humans that do classes. They are not in nature. So you have here the picture of the double heritage of Linnean essentialism and Darwinian nominalism. To be more precise, you have the double heritage of Linnean essentialism and evolution. We think about evolution between classes. Evolution is not a matter of classes. Evolution is a matter of content. Individuals, populations of individuals do evolve, do descend from each other, but groups do not evolve. Groups are nested within each other. In that picture, it was said that birds descend from reptiles, and reptiles descend from amphibians, and amphibians descend from fishes. Classes do not descend from each other. Classes are created by us, So the correct words is that birds do not descend from reptiles. They are reptiles. They are nested within the box reptile because they do have reptilian characters. They do have keratinous scales on their toes, on their legs. So here you have first evolution, and there, after having constructed the trees, you create a new classification. So here evolution is before classification. and classification was set before evolution. And this is something we have to deal with when teaching evolution, even at the university. For science, to summarize, for science, there is a theory that sets the meaning of classification. And the classification needs facts to classify. So at school, we don't have any evolution first. So you have only facts. You don't have the theory to analyze facts. So you need to control facts from the pedagogical point of view. You need to control facts in order to perform a classification with which you will be able to grasp at the end the question of evolution. So you go back to theory there. Using this path, you leave essentialism, you give the kids to abandon essentialism to be able to receive evolution at the end. So it's difficult because, as you see, the direction of arrows are not the same in that picture and that picture. You have to do the reverse process. So you give a short list of selected species, what I call a controlled sample. And the kids make the list of what they have, not what they do, but they make the list of what they have. And it is the moment when you can precise the vocabulary. And you have the form to fill. And if the vocabulary has been, first of all, setted and precised, they will be able to fill this table with features and a name of animals. So you can fill the table, and if you do a set with each column, you arrive to nested sets. It's so simple, you will say. Yes, it is simple, but the issues are tremendous. The issues are enormous. Doing that, kids tacitly realize that we do classify. It is not written in nature. We do classify, which is very important to start with evolution later. And you put on each set, you don't put names, first of all, you put justification. A classification needs a justification. And evolution will arrive later, remember, within this pedagogical process. Then after that, you can put names on sets. Obviously, scientists have given names to those sets. So when you teach, you go from classification to evolution by asking the question. You have put the dog and the cat in the same set because they both share fur and ear pavilions. They have they have features in common. They have characters in common. Where does this sharing come from? And it takes 10 minutes for 9 years old to 10 years old kids. It takes 10 minutes to express Darwin ideas. They don't know anything about Darwin, but they say they do not baby each other now, but they were doing it long ago. Their ancestors were doing babies each other. This is the reason why they share some things in common. So common descent, or if you prefer, descent with modification, is already an answer spontaneously given by kids. If these ancestors of cats and dogs did give to cats and dogs their characters, what happened in the past? They obligatorily change. Was the ancestor a dog? If it was a dog, it has changed on the path from the ancestral dog to the cat. Otherwise, the cat will be a dog. Is that ancestor a cat? If it is the situation, it has changed from the ancestral cat to the actual dog. Otherwise, the dog would be a cat. Was it something in between? If it was something in between, it had changed in the two paths from the common ancestor. Otherwise, dogs and cats wouldn't be what they are. So common descent is automatically gives the idea of transformation, of transformism, if you prefer, change through time. In science, evolutions, obviously, it's the reverse. Evolution gives the specification. I have to stop now because the time is gone. For the conclusion, I will say, cognitive issue for school children is first of all how to classify and to make the distinction between separation and grouping. And they realize that we do classify. You can organize different classifications of the same sample of species according to different programs. An ecological one, a utilitarian one, a systematic one. We do classify. When the kids do classify themselves, they leave essentialism to be ready to welcome evolution. There is an epistemological issue for teachers. The number of groups that are taught or learned is not written in nature. It is a pedagogical decision. I have seen some teachers that were they felt unhappy with the idea that the sample there would be any snail or there will be any insect. It's not a problem. You can add species as long as the process is understood. Don't mix, first of all, the biological purposes and the epistemological purposes. Pedagogical issue for teachers is to clearly distinguish our cognitive and epistemological purposes from our biological purposes. In a first step, we have to select organisms given to classify by the school children. Biological issue for everyone to promote scientific knowledge of life. I don't need to convince you about this. And there is also a political issue for everyone to practice scientific reasoning at school, because the organization of the scientific debate has something to do with the democratic debate. We don't confuse the criticism of ideas and the criticism of persons, which is very important. And kids performing a scientific debate, a collective scientific debate within the classroom are learning to exchange about ideas and leave apart things concerning persons, which is very important both in science and in democracy. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sorry, German, maybe I was a little bit long, right? I took something like almost
don't worry, Guillaume.
55 minutes.
Okay, so can you hear me? It's
Yes,
okay?
I can hear you. My English is not so fluent as my French, so it took more time.
Don't worry. Thank you very much, Guillaume, Professor Lecointre, for such interesting, I will say, defiant and provocative dialectical presentation. So now, okay, the first question was made by, I want to introduce Professor Marcelo Mayorga. He's a historian from Universidad de Magallanes. He's our counterpart in the agreement that we have with Universidad de Chile, Universidad de Magallanes. And his question is mainly related to what can you tell us about the reception interpretation of early influence of Charles Darwin's ideas in mainland Europe about the way biology was perceived, especially in France, considering the strong difference with the Anglo-Saxon evolutionary school. This having in mind your book, Le Monde de Darwin, edited under your supervision. I'm copying in the chat. For you, for everybody. Okay.
Where is the chat? Okay. Can you tell us about the Yes. Yes. Historically, Darwin's idea took time to enter the scientific community, French scientific community. Historians say that Darwin's idea were started to be accepted in part of the French scientific community only in the years 1880. But it took only something like 10 or 20 years. There was in the very early 20th century, there was a strong neo-Lamarckian current in the French biologists that that postponed a little bit the acceptance of Darwin's idea in the French mainstream. So it was late. I mean, the real you have to wait for the 1930s to have French Darwinian programs, really Darwinian programs of research. Only a very few, to put it in other words, in the French context, only a very few of single individuals were Darwinian in the late 19th century in France. Albert Gaudry, for instance, the paleontologist Albert Gaudry. But otherwise, most of people were rather Lamarckian. I wouldn't say that it was all the same stuff in Europe across Europe. There were early Darwinian Italians or Darwinian Russians. So the situation is heterogeneous across Europe. I'm not specifically proud about the French reception of Darwin's ideas in the early 20th century. There are differences in reading Darwin. Yes, you're right. The first translation of Darwin's work in French was made by an anarchist woman. It was Clémence Royer, and she modified the words, Darwin's words, to offer to her cause some support. And it was made also by Herbert Spencer in the English context of the Victorian society. As you know, 1 year, less than 1 year after The Origin of Species came out, Herbert Spencer developed a philosophical evolutionism that imported natural selection within human societies. And the main argument was, if I put it short, the main argument was don't help the poor, because if you help the poor, you would modify the equilibria of natural selection, and you will promote the existence of people that are poor and not desired in the English society. Those people, those bourgeois of the Victorian era were obsessed by the decline of the quality of the English population. Galton, Spencer, people like that. So they did some cherry picking. They picked some parts of Darwin's books that were useful for them and use it in the domains of sociology and economy. And this is what we called at that time social Darwinism, which is not a Darwinism actually, because it's just a function of just a small part of Darwin's work used in another field. Now, Darwin himself never took seriously those ideas of Spencer. He wrote it in his autobiography in 1876. So yes, the Anglo-Saxon world warmly received Darwin, but also misused Darwin. And maybe in Europe, in continental Europe, Darwin was more read with caution and without this liberalism. The English had liberal glasses. They read Darwin with liberal glasses, but those glasses were not the ones of continental Europe. So the situation is more complex. Maybe, Gelman, you have heard about Kropotkin, for instance. In 1889, Kropotkin used Darwin exactly in the reverse way than Herbert Spencer way to use Darwin. Kropotkin saw in Darwin's book of 1971, Descent of Man, he saw the natural reason why humans practice mutual help, entraide. The French title of Kropotkin's book is L'Entraide. Obviously, Darwin thought that mutual help in natural populations is a behavior that was selected precisely by natural selection. Those populations that practiced mutual help did more babies in certain circumstances than those ones that didn't do that. So it is the origin of animal societies for Darwin, and also the origin of human societies. So Kropotkin used that items to promote its own way of thinking. So different parts of Darwin's writing were used in different ways according to the country we consider.
Okay, no, thank you very much for answering the question from Professor Marcelo Mayorga, who is now in Magallanes, actually. Now I will give the word to Felipe Rodriguez, who is an anthropologist, physical anthropologist, and he finished his magister in München last year in evolutionary biology. Go, Felipe, please.
Thank you, Professor. And also thank you, Guille, for the presentation. So actually, my question was, what do you think that's the role of us scientists recycling these misunderstandings of the theory of evolution? Because, for example, as you mentioned, we normally have to make a compromise. And at least what I've seen is that people tend to make the compromise for simplicity and not to precision, because mostly like they think that precision is technicism and jargon and all this kind of stuff. And normally we as scientists were never taught how to make scientific communication for non-scientists, how to make outreach, for instance. So what do you think that it's our role precisely in maintaining these misunderstandings in the public?
You meant that we scientists participate to maintain a certain kind of misunderstanding. Did I understand? Excuse me. Did I understand you well? Your question is that scientists participate themselves to some degree of misunderstanding. Is it what you said?
Yes, particularly when we do outreach. For example, when you mentioned about evolution, basically we were talking mostly in macro evolution. Normally we don't talk that much about the microevolution, about how within populations of one species, it's still evolution when these different populations diversify. When we talk about the times of evolution, we tend to talk in chronological time, what happens in 100, 1,000, Meanwhile, evolution works in generational time. So, for example, human beings evolve. If we say that generational time, so 55 years, that means 4 generations in 100 years. But for Drosophila, for which a generation could be 30 days, let's say, or 15 days, that means that a year we have 13, like around 34 generations. And so 100 years is mostly enough for 2,400 generations. So there are ways in which we as scientists oversimplify evolution just to make it more, that can create problems when talking with the public.
You're right. Many times I could see my own colleagues doing pedagogical mistakes toward the public, and we are participating to some kind of confusion, yes, about evolution. I recognize it, obviously. The main action, to my eyes, the main action, more than correcting our own colleagues, the main action would be to work with to track our colleagues, to dialogue with the people that are involved in jobs of disseminating science in general, journalists, teachers, all people that are not professional scientists, but we are going to speak about evolution to the public instead of you. You have to work with them, and the best strategy, to my eyes, it may not be to. You can publish books to improve pedagogy of evolution, but most of the time your colleagues won't read your book. So the best thing to do is to take your colleague by the hand and to organize a dialogue with other professionals, and all of us having the purpose to improve the understanding of evolution by the public. This is what in Europe there is a network that the name is EVOKE, Evolutionary Knowledge for Everyone. And what is nice in that network is that there are different professionals, journalists, teachers, people working at museums. They organize conferences or activities within museums, and so on. And all different professions will work together to find the best way to speak about evolution to the public at any level of temporality, as you mentioned, microevolution, micro and macro, micro and macro, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Felipe. There in the chat, I invite you, Guillaume, to see the chat, because there's Juan Centellas sent a very interesting and long question. I resume it, have Felix Di Verona help me in resuming. The question is from Juan Centellas: how to use classification to promote the teaching of evolution in school? And later we have Nicolas Escobar and Sylvain Marcelini, okay? So the question is how to use classification to promote the teaching of evolution in school.
How to use classification
to promote the teaching of evolution in school. In the chat now.
Yes. It was the main point of my talks, how to use classification to promote teaching evolution at school. I will take the opportunity in that we speak about classification without having spoken about evolution before, to use classification in order to promote the teaching of evolution later on. When maybe I was not clear enough, but when the kids have to promote teaching, excuse me, I'm reading the. Yes, if the kids have themselves drawn a set with a number of species within the set, and because they have something in common, they have features in common. the starter, the trigger is the question: if they do share something in common, where does that sharing come from? And there are three kind of answers that can come out from the classroom. They share things in common because they do babies in common. So there is a debate in the classroom. Everyone knows that a cat, a mouse, and a dog do not make babies in common. So they do have things in common, but they don't do babies in common. So it's not now that sort of thing happened. It happened, but in the past. So the first answer could be they have common ancestors. The second explanation would be they have fur and ears pavilion in common because they live in the same place. Some kids answer that. And if you take a white bear, you can show that the white bear has also fur and also ear pavilion, but they clearly do not live at the same place as the dog, the cat, or the mouse. So it's not the place that gives the organ by itself. I mean, so this answer can be refuted rapidly. A third kind of answer would be they share each other because God gives them this feature, the providentialist answer. And this is the moment I explain that we are in a science classroom, and that the evocation of God is not part of the rule of the game in science. You can speak about God, but it is not what you can mobilize in science, because God does everything. So if he does everything, he does not explain things specifically. I mean, in 9 to 11 years old classroom, they understand that a single answer to any specific question does not explain anything. Excuse me, why do you find waves on the surface of the sea? Oh, my kids, God did it. Okay. Oh, excuse me, why do cats have fur and pavilion of the ear? Oh, my kids, it's because the providence or God give it to him. Okay. Oh, why the leaves of the tree are green? Oh, may God gave the greenness of the leaves on trees. Okay, so at the end of the story, a single answer wouldn't explain any, wouldn't feel any need of specific questions, specific answer to specific questions. So it's not the game. It's not the game. If God does everything, there is no need for science. So science works because God is not part of the explanation. You can believe in God, obviously, but it belongs to you. It's not the collective game we are playing in science. So these three kind of answers have been regularly met and treated in classrooms, and it's possible to promote the evolutionary way of thinking by using, first of all, classification. Yes, it's possible.
Thank you very much for Juan Centello. French comment, you can read it later. We are recording the chat also. So next question, Nicolas Escobar. Escobar is in the chat, Guillaume. In terms of features transmission, won't you agree that even the behavior inherited from progenitor to progeny is modulated by genes? So in that sense, evolutionary change are ultimately gene change? Nicolas Escobar.
Yes, it's a sophisticated question and good question. A transmission of behaviors can be modulated by genes. You have used an important word. You have said modulated. You have not used controlled. what is changing in evolutionary theory now is that we are able to recognize that we transmit far more than the genes. What do I mean by far more? To explain the process of transmission and the effects of what is transmitted on populations, you don't need to pass by genes. You don't need the explanatory or level of genes. Put in other words, genes do not have the monopoly of explanation. You can explain why a certain feature is transmitted at one given level of organization of the organism. You can explain how it is transmitted without using a genetic determinism. So this is what is changing. It is possible that the transmission of a behavior can be modulated by genes, but modulated is already something different. That the role we gave to genes in the last third of the 20th century. In the last third of the 20th century, it was difficult to think about a transmission without passing through a strong genetic determinisms at that time. It is not the same anymore. So I agree that a behavior could be modulated by some genetic impulse. The important point is that we are able to understand the gain in the fitness or the effects on the population with the transmission of a behavior through learning, for instance. Learning from individual to another in different kind of animals. Learning is a way of transmission, something that will have an impact on the reproductive success of the population. So we don't need genes for that. We need genes, but we don't need genes for anything. I mean, we have modulated the power we give to genes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Nicolas. And there was a question by Sylvain Marcelini, but here is in Spanish. It's going to a lecture now. So the question, I guess you can answer to the last one. Is thanks for this great talk, Sylvain Marcelini. I agree that the world seems fixed and code remains a code, but even Darwin was impacted by the way farmers could transform and diversify code. Why do you think that the artificial selection is not widely accepted by the lay person in favor of evolutionary change?
You mentioned the question of Sylvain Marcelini, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is written in Spanish. Can you repeat it?
No, it's in English. I sent. Now, thanks for this great talk. It's there.
You sent it in English. Okay, I'm looking for that.
I'm sending it again. It's the last one now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that artificial selection is not widely accepted by the layperson in favor of evolutionary change? Or maybe I was not clear enough. I do think that artificial selection could be widely accepted in favor of evolutionary change. Yes, it's a good, maybe I was not clear, but to me, using artificial selection, it's a powerful pedagogical way to go to evolutionary change. Yes. Yes, it can be widely accepted. Yes, yes.
Great. No, thank you very much to all the people attending this exciting presentation. I said that provocative and defiant. So I invite you in the chat. I put that the next November, Professor Lecointre will be in Chile. We hope that we will be no problem with this pandemic conditions. So we are inviting you, all you, for next November to attend the new conference by Professor Lecointre. Okay. Thank you very much, Guillaume, for your time and for sharing with us, with all the people, your ideas about how to teach evolution and not only how to teach, but how to think about evolution.
Thank you, Guillaume. I will let you know that if some of you need my PowerPoint as a souvenir, I will leave the PDF of my PowerPoint to all of you. And thank you to all of you for being here with me instead of my approximative, close to my approximative English. I hope it was not too difficult to follow. Thank you for all of you.
Eduardo?
Thank you very much.
Will you close, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Guillaume. Very good to see you, and have very fond memories of our visit to Museo Nacional de Histoire Naturelle in Paris.
Yes, I remember.
Yes, and so I really am thrilled with this activity, and we had a very, very good audience from both universities to follow your very interesting talk, and we hope this is just a step in a very long-term collaboration that you and Germán have started, and I congratulate you on the effort, and thank you very much, and good luck in the future steps.
Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Great. So sorry, there's Reynaldo Chadier that is unanswered question, but sorry for the time. In next November, Reynaldo, I invite you. We will make a string sending the presentation that we made by Guillaume during his visit to Chile. Okay, thank you very much all for attending this meeting. Eduardo, maybe we stay next to talk some for the next. See you on Monday, Guillaume. Okay.
Okay.
Monday. The meeting with the. Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye to all of you from all universities.
See you, Marcelo, too, next Monday.
See you, Marcelo. See you. Thank you for being here. Bye bye.